What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is physical therapist Jason Modafari. Jason has recently joined the Athletic Potential team. For those of you that might not know the Athletic Potential name, that is the rehab physical therapy arm of Driveline. You guys probably know the name Dylan Newcomer from us saying it, I guess, until the cows come home, literally on this podcast, working so closely with him. But Dylan has expanded, brought Jason in to the fold, and Jason is now located down at Driveline Tampa. He has the pleasure of treating athletes down there, and he is only about 6 weeks in. I know he still kind of feels like he's drinking water from a fire hose at this time, but it sounds like it's been a great transition so far. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Jason, let him introduce himself a little bit and tell us a little bit of his background. So, Jason, thanks a ton for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is actually the first time I've ever been on a podcast, so it's kind of cool to actually be on this end of it instead of just watching podcast episodes. And I always kind of wondered, like, I wonder how it would be to actually be on one of those. You watch so many podcasts, and it always seemed like something that I thought would be fun to do. So yeah, it's really cool to be on here. Yeah, so like you said, I've been with Athletic Potential now for about 6 or 7 weeks. I've been down here in Florida. Previously, I guess I'll start from the beginning. I actually got my undergrad it was at the time the College of Mount St. Joe in Cincinnati, Ohio, in athletic training. And I see a lot of people that have been on the Layback podcast and just in general kind of talk about how, I was an athlete and I got injured. And that's what kind of led me to physical therapy because my physical therapist was really good. And I thought that was really cool. And I wanted to do that. But for me, honestly, when I was in college in athletic training, I really didn't even know what a physical therapist was, honestly. I had never seen one. Anytime I was injured, the athletic trainer at whatever school I was at took care of it. And luckily, I never really sustained a super serious injury. And my brother actually told me we were in athletic training together, we were in the same class. And he was like, I think I want to go to PT school. And I was like, PT school, what is that? Personal training? And he said, no, physical therapy. And I was like, well, so explain to me exactly what that is again. And he did. And I thought, that actually does sound really cool. So I kind of learned a little bit more about it and researched it and ended up applying with him. And it was kind of cool because we got to be in the same PT class. So I did that. So that was 3 years. Graduated from, while I was there, it became the University of Mount St. Joe. So I was the first class there in 2015. And I kind of knew that I wanted to treat athletes just from going through the clinicals. You go through every setting. So I did 2 skilled nursing facilities and then 2 outpatient. We just had to do 2 inpatient, 2 outpatient. I was never at a hospital, never in traveling, but I saved my 2 outpatient ones for last because those were the ones that I thought I was going to be more interested in. And that's kind of where I thought my career path would go. I was lucky enough to get a job right out of college at an outpatient orthopedic clinic. I mean, it said sports medicine. I would say I didn't treat a ton of athletes while I was there. Unfortunately, that particular clinic, it was physical therapist owned, so they didn't have an affiliation with the doctor's office or with surgeons or a hospital. And the local hospital system there kind of had a monopoly on all of the high school. All of their athletes kind of went to those affiliated physical therapy clinics. So we didn't see a ton of athletes. I would say in the year I was there, I probably saw maybe a handful of high school kids, and it was good at first, but I kind of wanted to get a little bit more into the athletic population. So after about a year, I had the opportunity to join a clinic that I had done a clinical at that was a little bit more sports medicine based out of Cincinnati. So I did that. I was there for 10 years, and luckily they saw a lot of athletes. They had surgeons that obviously the Reds medical director, Dr. Kremchek, in Cincinnati. So I got to work with him for 10 years, and through their affiliation with the Reds, I was introduced to seeing overhead athletes probably my first couple of years, just because when I went there, I kind of asked like, hey, what's a niche that I could kind of get involved with here? And that was kind of the first thing they said was, well, are you willing to see overhead athletes? And I said, yeah, it sounds like it'd be cool. So like my second or third year there, I started doing that and I really liked it. The Reds would contract their physical therapy out. So a physical therapist would go down to the stadium and treat as the Reds physical therapist. So I got to go to spring training maybe my 5th year and just kind of observe and just kind of see how it went. And I thought that was really cool. By my 7th year, I was able to be one of the physical therapists that went down there and treat the Reds. So I did that for the past 3 years, which was great. It was a super, super good opportunity. I felt like I learned a lot through that. But kind of like what's been previously said on this podcast by others is I think that sometimes the burnout at kind of some of those insurance-based clinics gets a little bit overwhelming and you just end up seeing 2, 3 patients at a time. And I felt like I just got to a point where I wanted to be able to be a little bit more one-on-one with patients and be able to offer a full treatment session uninterrupted with no other patients, especially if I was going to work with higher level athletes and baseball players. And The other thing that always interested me was the performance side of things, which was a little bit limited where I was. It's just hard to kind of incorporate that as much with some of those patients. So I wanted to get a little bit more involved with that. And I just kind of wanted to continue to learn. I've seen a lot of physical therapists that kind of get to a point in their career and they're happy with that and they're happy to just kind of continue on and just go through the motions. But for me, I just kind of felt like, why do this if I'm just going to stay at this level and just continue to do this? I wanted to continue to get better. And I felt like I met Dylan last year and we kind of talked about this for a little while and he offered me this opportunity. And I felt like that was going to be a really good opportunity for me to do that and to continue to kind of grow and get better. So I moved down here in September and I've been doing this ever since then. And it's been great. It's been really cool. So I have zero business education or knowledge. I never took a business class. So it was a little bit eye-opening when I got down here. It was just me. And Dylan has helped. He's been a tremendous help. He's been huge with helping me kind of acclimate to this and get in here and get going. But he's in Washington. So it was kind of cool to get to figure things out and get this running as the only physical therapist here. I think it just allows me a little bit more freedom and I can do things the way I want and have a little bit more control over how kind of the rehab works here. So yeah, I guess that's kind of as far as introduction goes.
I think that last bit of the answer will enable us to go deep into the weeds straight from the jump, kind of where my mind was going when you mentioned the burnout that so many physical therapists encounter. I was thinking about it when you addressed it earlier. I've suffered from burnout. I would assume most people who are listening on this podcast have suffered from burnout. Hell, athletes suffer from burnout when all they do is stare at a training table every single day. It seems like rehabbing athletes suffer from that all the time. But right now we'll focus on the physical therapist. So maybe the lesser served market of the podcast listeners. So the reason why I think that latter part of your answer kind of leads us this direction. Do you think a lot of the burnout occurs in the physical therapy industry because physical therapists kind of are always stuck in this general space? It's hard to get specific unless you are in the cash-based space and can really dictate who you're seeing, as opposed to being told who to serve and who to treat and how to do it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just has to do kind of with the business model. As physical therapists, we do this for the reward of being able to see these athletes and these patients do what they want to do, get back to competition, perform at the highest level, whatever it is. So we're not in it just for the money. But I think that with cash-based physical therapy, you're able to treat one-on-one and still make a living. Whereas I think sometimes just the business model with some of those other clinics and companies, what ends up happening is you don't get reimbursed the full amount. The money has to get dispersed all over the place in terms of the company. And in order for the company to stay above water and make money, it kind of turns into more of a volume game. So I think that's just kind of the nature of it. And I've heard that from a lot of other therapists in that setting. I've heard it from therapists in skilled nursing facilities and hospital-based settings as well. So I think that's just kind of the nature of it there. And not that it's a bad thing. Like I said, a lot of physical therapists are happy in those settings because you're definitely going to have patients. So your floor is extremely high. And I feel like your ceiling maybe isn't quite as high, but your floor is a lot higher. So you're always guaranteed that, hey, I know I'm going to come in today and I'm going to have a full caseload and have a full day and I'm going to have patients this whole week. And I'm not going to have to worry about going out and marketing or being on social media or generating my own caseload. There's obviously a good side of it too. And you get to work alongside surgeons and see that side of it. So there's definitely benefits to it. And I think for me personally, I just got to a point where I was like, kind of want to see what else is out there and what else I can do to kind of elevate myself even higher as far as this goes. Just because, again, for me personally, I was just somebody that wanted to be as good as I could at this. And through talking with Dylan the last year or so, and I'm sure you know because you've had him on this podcast multiple times, but when I started talking to him and I met him, I thought, wow, this guy's unbelievable as far as his knowledge, his treatment style, his commitment to treating baseball players. And I thought, man, that's what I want to be. Like, that's what I want to do. And I want to be able to be at that level. Like we kind of talked about before, I feel like I've learned so much in just the 6 weeks that I've been here as far as treatment styles, different things I can do, different ways to elevate throwing programs. The Flex Pro, I hadn't used one before I had come down here. We've talked the last couple of weeks, which has helped tremendously. I use it every single day, multiple times. I feel like a tool like that sometimes isn't as common in different settings. Like where I was, I don't even think anybody really knew about it. Here we have two of them. And like I said, I use it every day. So just things like that, where some of the technology that's out there, you're afforded the ability to kind of work with it a little bit better. Being able to see one person at a time, I can really use it the way that it should be used and even kind of alter the way that it's used for some of these guys and create their own treatment plans because you have the time to do it. With guys down here now, I have the time to think about, okay, when you come in today, this is how you're presenting, this is what you're telling me. We have an hour. How can we make sure we get the most out of this treatment? As opposed to, okay, I'm going to put these two people on the bike. I'll come back over and then we'll get started. We'll do some manual work. Here's some exercises. Go out and do those. And when you finish those, come back into me. And so I feel like just having that full hour to really be able to progress each treatment and individualize it for the patient, that's the biggest thing for me. That's been huge. I'm able to get the most out of doing this at this point now. And I feel like I'm just able to better serve these guys. At Driveline here, we see a lot of guys that are from college all the way up to professional baseball. So I think being able to offer those guys the one-on-one time is huge. That was just something that over the past couple of years really wanted to get a little bit more involved with and be able to kind of explore that avenue of physical therapy. When I was in school, I mean, they didn't even like talk about it. I didn't even know that that was really a possibility that you could do it. It took me a couple of years being out of school to even really know what that really was and that people did that. And I think now it's kind of funny. So when I got down here, I just started a business Instagram page for this location last week. So I just started. And I think in the last week of starting that, I've already had more cash-based physical therapists reach out to me just to talk or introduce themselves. I've met more of them in the last week than I did in 10 years. It's almost like its own little community. And once you're a cash-based physical therapist, then everybody kind of gets together and kind of wants to network and communicate, which I think is really cool because I thought it would have been a little bit more of kind of like a competition thing where it's like, oh, well, you do the same thing I do in the same setting. Like I want to keep my information to me. But it's been really cool. Like I said, I've met more of them in a week than I did in 10 years. And so I just think it's been a cool change. And like I said, I think the biggest thing is that I feel like the ceiling is much higher here. And I can really kind of continue to grow and get better at this and just better serve this population.
Going back to what you said about the more traditional clinics or insurance-based pay, it seems like it's very easy to fall into a clock in, clock out kind of routine as a physical therapist, as opposed to truly being dialed and creative every single step of the way when it comes to athlete care. Like you said, you have a single athlete for an hour and you have to individualize, personalize, tailor plans in order to fit that individual's needs, as opposed to just trying to keep your head above water, but also doing what is prescribed on a sheet of paper in a clinic. And it's not that every physical therapist, as you mentioned, falls into that. Not every physical therapist that's in more of the traditional model suffers from burnout. There are incredible physical therapists that function in those settings. A guy we both have talked about before off air and was on last week's episode, Nolan Rapay. Nolan Rapay spent years in the select medical system working in an insurance-based clinic. Nolan is a top 1% of 1% physical therapist in the world, and he was in the traditional model. Now he has shifted into a new role in the private sector, but to think that you could get that coming out of just a doctor's office in the St. Louis area is crazy. And there's probably others that we don't know about that are that good or that skilled doing similar things. But I just wanted to bring that up. I'd be curious if you feel any differently about that clock in, clock out, but that's kind of how I internalized it. Moving on to what you're doing now and having to be prepared or having to work to tailor programs, it kind of seems like now you're thrown out to sea without a raft. You kind of got to figure it out. You have to be able to problem solve on the fly, but that's also the beauty of it because you're not doing the same thing every day. You have to meet the athlete where they're at to solve the actual problem. And although maybe to people outside of our world in baseball, everything might seem the same. Every UCL injury might seem the same. Every rotator cuff injury might seem the same. It's just a guy who wants to throw a ball again. But you now have to figure out what is holding this guy back. Why did the injury occur? What is the low-hanging fruit? And thankfully, in your setting, you have this tremendous database now to call upon, whether it's mocap, whether it's force plate data on the high performance side, whether it's TrackMan data. Now that you have this abundance of information to your left, right, up, and down, what are things that have kind of called to you that you are now using in your athlete care plans that you maybe never could even fathom before you step foot in Driveline Tampa?
Two things come to mind immediately. I think one is the use of PlyoCare balls, weighted balls in return to throw programs. I use it with every single one now. I made a post on it last week. It was my first post on the Instagram because I thought it was just super important. And
well, I got to interrupt real quick. How'd it do? How'd the first post do?
I think it did pretty well. I got like 55 likes on it, which for one, after only having like 20 something followers at the time,
That's pretty good.
I just need to continue to scale it, but
that's right.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of post something initially that I thought was a little bit, I mean, I don't even want to say unique because a lot of people use weighted balls now, but just something that, at least for me, last year at the last clinic I was at, if somebody would have posted that, I would have been like, oh, that's really cool. I want to see what they have to say about that. We didn't really use them in the return to throws. And I think a lot of it has to do with, and I mentioned this in my post, is there's a fairly nuanced way to use them properly and execute them, especially if you're just working with a little leaguer or a high school kid that's maybe never used them. I think it becomes even more important to have somebody there that can coach them properly on it, that can help them make sure they're executing it properly. But I think a lot of people just look at them as, oh, people use the weighted balls to throw harder, and they kind of look at it as almost being taboo. So I think one thing being down here that I've kind of really gotten into is you can safely and effectively use them without increasing the risk of injury. And actually, with the return to throws, you can actually decrease the risk of injury on return to throws if you use them appropriately. So I think that's one thing that's been huge for me, is because I really didn't use them before in return to throws at all. But I think they've been huge down here. Obviously, Driveline has been known as kind of using weighted balls and velocity programs, but also now Driveline's using them in return to throws. And I think a lot of that's credit to Dylan too, who has done a lot of work with weighted balls and kind of advocated for their use as well. And another thing I think that I've done a lot more with here is kind of meshing physical therapy and strength conditioning too. I think at the last place I was at, that was a little bit more limited. One, just because of the equipment that we had access to, and two, it's harder to develop a strength conditioning program for an athlete and help them execute it when you've got 2 or 3 other people that you're treating at the same time, especially if you want the program to be alive and actually evolving. Here, I've had a lot more opportunity to kind of, in almost a lot of the rehab, I feel like is kind of just a modified strength and conditioning session, which is kind of what I wanted to do because I feel like you get the most out of the athlete with that. And I've even talked to a couple of guys here that feel like the past or other places that they've gone, they feel like the goal with rehab is just to get them back to, okay, you are healthy enough that you can go play in a competitive game, but are you 100%? Is your level of play going to be what it was before you got injured? Maybe, maybe not, but that's not really the goal. The goal is to just get you back. And I think being able to do this, being able to do things like incorporate weighted balls and incorporate more strength and conditioning, I think the goal now becomes, let's not just get you back, but let's get you back at the level you were at playing before you got injured or higher. Athletes even feel it, that they feel like, I got back, but I don't feel like I was really ready to throw a baseball off the mound at 100%. So I think those two things, like I said, initially come to mind that kind of allow me to do that. And those are two things that I've really done a lot more with here in 6 weeks than I ever did before. It's just been something, as far as baseball goes, that's really been able to help me better serve these guys, because I think that's another thing that's interesting. I was thinking about this with baseball is, as far as physical therapy goes, like where I was at before, we called ourselves throwing therapists. So it was basically, you were a therapist that worked with the baseball players. Well, there wasn't a soccer therapist or a football therapist or a tennis. So I feel like baseball is just nuanced enough that you can have your own kind of niche within baseball as far as the physical therapist, because throwing and hitting and the mechanics that go behind those, it's unique to baseball. Obviously, there's unique aspects of all sports, but I think the throwing itself is very niche because of the throwing programs. It's not something where you can, as a physical therapist, say, okay, well, you're ready to go throw, just go out there on the field and start throwing a baseball. It has to be very meticulously written out and programmed and executed for them to be able to get back safely just because of how stressful throwing a ball is. And I think that was one thing that kind of drew me to baseball is the nuances of it and kind of its own niche that you can kind of have as a physical therapist, where maybe other sports don't have that as much, or if they do, it's just a little bit different. But that was something too that was just really cool about working primarily with baseball players, is it just offers you that ability to kind of get more involved in that specific niche and kind of get a little bit more specific with your treatments and what you're doing.
I want to backpedal a little bit to what you were saying specifically about the loading strategies in that regard. So I recall back on what Josh Davis was saying on his episode about kind of the continuum that we see athletes in this physical therapy realm. We're always separating athletes for some reason and treating rehabbing athletes as if they're different, as if they don't have the same goals as a healthy athlete. Yes, they want to make it back to competition, but they still want to be as good as they can possibly be. Knowing that, and knowing that tissue responds to load, that's ultimately what's going to get these guys better. It's not just making them feel good. Granted, feeling good is part of it, so the manuals matter, or doing manual therapy matters, but actually loading the individual is super important. How are you tying in your prescriptive exercises into the greater development plan? Like, are you still treating these guys, or do you think if you put the athlete hat on, when they're coming to see you, do you think they feel as if they are injured or not the same? Or are you able to kind of still ingratiate them into the greater athlete pursuit of perfection, greatness, what have you?
I think depending on the athlete, I think kind of a combination. Obviously, these guys are coming in aware of the fact that maybe they are injured or were injured and are coming back from it. But at least kind of some of the feedback that I've gotten here and what I try to do is that when they leave, I want them to feel like, I felt like that was more of a workout than just a PT session. And I think the feedback from that is ultimately positive, and guys like that because they feel like, I feel like I really challenged myself here. And that's what I want. I had a guy last week after we got done, he said, "Man, I've never done arm care like this, but like I feel like this is what arm care should be. This is what arm care should feel like. This is what I would expect it to feel like." That's kind of the goal that I have, is for guys to leave and feel like they were challenged appropriately, but challenged. Because I think one of the issues that happens a lot, and I was guilty of this earlier on in my career for sure, was underloading athletes and patients in general because it's safe. If you underload somebody, the chances that they're going to injure themselves during the session are lower. And eventually, just because of the natural healing processes of the body, eventually they probably will heal enough to get back to doing what they were going to do. Maybe it'll take longer. Maybe they won't be at the level they were at before, but they'll get there a lot of times. So then you feel as the therapist like, okay, I didn't injure them. I didn't hurt them. I didn't cause a setback. But just with training in general, there's going to be an inherent risk. And I think that you're doing them just as much of a disservice by underloading them than you might be by overloading them, because at least if you're overloading them, they can give you the response of, hey, that was a little bit too much. Hey, this is how I felt. Okay, well, let's dose it back a little bit and kind of work up to that. Whereas if you underload them, a lot of them don't realize, they think, I'm injured. This is what I'm supposed to be feeling. They might not be able to give you the feedback that they're being underloaded because they don't know. They assume that that's appropriate, or that, hey, you're the therapist. So if this is the amount of loading, if this is the intensity that I'm supposed to be at with this injury right now, then I guess it is what it is. But I think with that underloading, you get guys kind of like we were talking about before, they get back to the sport, but then they get injured again because they might have been healthy enough to play competitively, but were they healthy enough to withstand the entire season, the year, the intensity of the level of play, whatever that is? That's kind of one thing that I saw happen a lot, was that maybe, guys were getting injured again. So I think that being able to integrate the strength training and being able to kind of mesh physical therapy with strength training and high performance training, ultimately we put them in a better position to succeed and get back to competition at the level that they're going to be able to not only compete at, but succeed at too. That's kind of what I try to do is make sure that guys are working hard enough in here to where they're being challenged, and to where when they're finished with rehab, they don't just feel like I could go back to my sport. They feel confident that I could go back to my sport and compete at the level that I was at before this all happened.
There's obviously a razor thin line between development and increased injury risk. We talk about that when it comes to principles of development, overreaching versus overtraining. Those two are so close together, but overreaching is oftentimes where compensation is going to occur, where we're going to develop. Your brain's probably starting to fire like, oh yes, now we're getting to the bodybuilding stuff. So yeah, everyone, Jason has a passion that we will discuss in bodybuilding. Don't worry, we're going to get there. He's probably itching now, like, oh yeah, I can talk about the meathead stuff. But yeah, there is this crazy small divide or crazy small gap between development and injury. And I think you stated that beautifully, that we have this chronic issue across the rehab space of being insanely risk averse. Not saying that we should start gambling like we're playing roulette at the casino when we're in rehab, but at some point we have to make rehab or make training harder than the game. Because how are we actually going to know if this athlete can move on, if they can withstand the forces? Then that's when you deal with re-injury or aggravation or setback type situations. When you say, "Oh, this guy's good to go," in his first live outing, he has a hiccup, or he goes to throw long toss for the first time, and the neurology has now outpaced the physiology. So you need to push guys. And I'm not saying that a hamstring strain here and there is like totally okay and that's just the price of doing business. But as you said, that's kind of where the feedback becomes so important, or in your current location, your current geography, where you can take force data all the time. You can look at a Flex Pro grip assessment and you can assess trends. So now, how are you utilizing objective measurements to toe that razor thin line so you can progress guys, so you can work them hard and treat them as if they are the athlete chasing down that goal that we discussed in the previous question?
Yes, you said with the objective measures with the Flex Pro and the force plates and dynamometers and strength testing and all that, I think it just obviously it gives you a clearer, more objective picture of, okay, where is this guy at from a readiness standpoint. In the past, you just do, like, for example, a manual muscle test, and they were just graded on numbers, 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, whatever. Well, what is a 4 out of 5? A 4 out of 5, me testing them, and a 4 out of 5, another therapist testing them, might feel completely different. Whereas if they're testing on a dynamometer or a force plate, the number is what it is. So you kind of have a little bit more of an objective value of where they're at that can help you determine their readiness. Same with the Flex Pro. That's a huge one, because in the past, there was really no way to objectify how strong somebody's finger flexors were. Like I think Dylan said on the previous podcast, you can use other creative ways to try to elicit the adaptations in those muscles with bands or kettlebells or iso holds, things like that. But even with that, how do you really know how hard that person is actually pushing themselves? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would tell a kid, hey, let's do these banded iso holds with your fingertip flexion, and have them hold the band and tell them, hey, I want you to make sure that you're at about a 70% intensity on that hold. Oh, okay. And then they're sitting there doing it while they're texting on their phone. Well, it's probably unlikely that you're actually causing enough stress to elicit any adaptation with that. Whereas with a device like the Flex Pro, you can't cheat that, because if they're doing it, they're either hitting that or they're not hitting that threshold. So it gives the athlete too feedback of, okay, I'm working hard enough to actually be getting something of value out of this training device. Same thing with the force plates. Guys in here love it. When guys are doing their mocaps, they're so fired up to go over there and do it. Guys will stand around and watch them and cheer for them. And I think that's huge, because when a guy's over there mocapping and doing counter force jumps or the push-ups, and guys are around him cheering him on, and they're yelling and screaming, trying to get hit a PR, I think just that environment, it brings the most out of these guys, to where if it's a therapist just sitting there with their hand trying to manual muscle test them, it's just not as motivational. And I think as a competitive athlete, they like that. You like that motivation. You like feeling like you're in a weight room and you're having guys cheer you on as you're trying to lift or do whatever it is. Being able to use those objective measures and those tools, one, it gives you more an objective value to know where the person is. And I think two, from a mental side of it, as far as the athlete's concerned, I think a lot of them, it gives them confidence if they hit the number that, hey, I know where I'm at. I feel good about my progress. Or if they're not hitting the number, they know, okay, I'm not training hard enough. And I think the Flex Pro is just an easy example of that, because that's one where, like I said, I had never used one. So when these UCL reconstructions were doing the rehab. And when they would go back to return to throw, we had a functional test where we would objectively test the range of motion, their strength. We would do some plyometrics testing. We would do like just a dynamometer, grip strength test, but nothing with the finger flexor. So at that point, it's like, okay, we're going to send you back to throw, but the 2 or 3 structures that are probably the most directly involved with stabilizing the medial elbow and providing support to the UCL, we have no idea how strong they are. We didn't even test them. Whereas with this now, you can objectively see where they're at. And it's funny because almost every single person that I've tested in here initially would test as concerning as far as their numbers. So it's cool to have technology like that because guys maybe you can tease out a weakness that they didn't even know they had. Because I think a lot of these guys that come in here for maybe an elbow or shoulder injury, they're not even really thinking about their finger flexors. And all of a sudden they test on this device and it's like, oh, wow, I was really weak there. I wouldn't have even thought to train that. It just gives guys even another thing where, hey, I need to work on that. And I didn't even know that it was weak.
Kind of bringing this to a head, at least this part of the conversation. I appreciate you going down the route of Flex Pro Grip and kind of explaining what we have on display. But you also painted the picture of what's going on literally behind you, behind those walls right now on the training floor. Guys trying to PR, guys working like crazy to reach certain metrics. If we put metrics in front of people, they're going to try to hit them. These are competitive athletes. And there's a reason that we're now able to, I guess, make the world healthier or make our world healthier because of these metrics. It matters. It's everything you said, the objectivity that we're able to provide, which is huge. We can now train at the correct loads for the correct amount of time under tension to actually make an adaptation. But it's not like athletes haven't cared about their forearm health before. Everybody in baseball has cared about the medial elbow. They've cared about the UCL. We just haven't been able to target it previously. And what we have been able to do is train force production from the ground up like crazy. We've gotten really good at putting force into the ground or lead leg blocks and other pieces of mechanics and shoulder internal rotation force. I don't even know the stuff that can be trained on force plates and Kaiser machines and all that crazy stuff that we have access to now. Not that it's crazy bad, it's all crazy good. But what we have found, and I've talked about it routinely now, is weak things break. And what we are going to see with Flex Pro Grip is what that true weakest link is. We've gotten so good at everything else that we had no idea that the forearm was just the weak link. And it makes sense because everything's going to work up the chain. Force has to be expressed out through the hand and into the baseball. And what connects the shoulder to the hand? Well, the elbow's in there. So it only makes sense that the forearm musculature, if it is undertrained, it's leaving the UCL exposed, or we're going to have a forearm strain, as in a flexor strain, and there's going to be issue there. So I appreciate you shedding light on that. I just kind of wanted to bring that to a head. Now I do want to tie in your kind of ulterior passion in bodybuilding, not just to have you talk about bodybuilding, but kind of the principles that you've learned from bodybuilding and how that has now influenced either the way you work with athletes or the way you think in this whole problem-solving game of athlete care.
Yeah, so I think in the fitness industry as a whole recently, they've gotten really big on science-based training. And it's controversial in terms of, is that the way to go now? Or do people still want to train with the bro splits because that's been effective and guys grew from that? But I think now there's a much bigger, a much heavier influence on the science of training. And there's a lot more literature out there and research being done, how to maximize muscle hypertrophy and minimize fatigue. It's interesting because when I first started to go down that path, as far as like, okay, how can I optimize not only my own training, but training athletes and training my patients and my clients, you look at the research and, like, for example, there's a lot of research now coming out with training that is saying that maybe do in a rep range of 4 to 7 or 8 reps is theoretically going to be optimal for hypertrophy because you're minimizing central nervous system fatigue. But at the same time, you can still train with higher reps and grow the muscle the same. You're just going to fatigue more. And I think it's helpful to have that information, but I think it comes with a caveat that you need to be able to integrate that into your own kind of experience and your own kind of anecdotal, I guess, result with your training. Because I think some people take the science too far and it's like, okay, well, every set I do now has to be between 4 and 8 because that's what the science says. But I think the interesting thing, and the gym I work out down here in Florida is a lot of professional bodybuilders. And it's interesting because you see none of them train that. These are the best bodybuilders in the world. So you think, okay, well, if none of these guys are training the way that the science is saying, how are they making so much progress? A lot of it comes down to what are they supplementing with? What else are they taking? Oh, well, that's why, because they're taking this or that or whatever. But the more I thought about that, I thought that might be true. But even if you were taking something, why wouldn't you still train the way that has been shown in science to work better if it would work better than your bro split or whatever you're doing? And I think it comes down to everybody's different. And I think physiology, there's still a lot of gray area in muscle physiology, even though we've figured out a lot more as far as how physiology works and how muscle grows optimally with training. I think for me, it's been important. And I think that's why actually training that way myself has helped me, because if you don't train yourself, it's going to be hard to know, okay, well, like for example, that's the rep range that has been shown in a lot of literature to be the most effective and efficient at growing muscle. For me personally, it's not. So I kind of vary up rep ranges. I like to do a little bit higher. If I stay in those rep ranges for an extended period of time, I start to get too beat up. My joints hurt. I can't train as hard. I need more rest breaks. And I think that's true for a lot of people, is that there's a lot of individual variability that I think sometimes isn't accounted for. So I think for me, it's important to use the science and use the evidence as far as how to train for hypertrophy and how to most efficiently generate mechanical tension in a muscle to provide adaptations or elicit adaptations. But then at the same time, knowing your client or your athlete and seeing how their body responds, because sometimes not everybody's going to respond the same way to training. So I think honestly, that's probably been the biggest thing I've learned is being able to kind of meet in the middle as far as the science and then as far as the kind of bro science goes. Because it seems to me now like it's huge on Instagram to be science-based and science-based training. And you see all these science-based muscle hypertrophy coaches out there that are training full body 3 times a week, and then all these crazy splits that they swear up and down that's the best split. But I think ultimately it just comes down to the individual and what works best for them. And I think as physical therapists, that's important because, I mean, everybody's different and we're treating people that are playing different sports at different levels, different positions. And obviously also you take into account the fact that a baseball pitcher's main goal shouldn't be to be as big as they possibly can be. So I think it's also important then in that case to be able to use some of the principles from bodybuilding training and hypertrophy training with the way that I train guys here, but also at the same time, look at what the end goal is. The end goal isn't for these guys to step on stage on a bodybuilding show. The end goal is for them to be able to throw a baseball as hard as they can, as safely as they can, and as effectively as they can with minimal injury risk. So I think that's been kind of an interesting thing for me, being able to incorporate some of those bodybuilding principles into training these athletes, but at the same time, keeping in mind that they're not bodybuilders and that they need to be able to do something totally different. But I think it's cool because I feel like it maybe isn't as much of a passion of a lot of people that work with baseball athletes or play baseball to be super into bodybuilding training. So I think it's something that's different. And sometimes I kind of feel like I'm an outlier because a lot of the physical therapists that work with baseball players played baseball in college. And I've even had players ask me like, oh, well, where did you play? And it's like, well, have you ever heard of Elder High School? And since, like you play at like Our Lady of Victory grade school, I didn't play high level baseball. And I don't play baseball now. Like when I leave work, I go to the gym and I work out. It's different, but I think it definitely has helped me because I think using the principles that I've learned from my own training have helped me to be able to more efficiently train some of these guys. It has helped me to be able to kind of minimize fatigue sometimes with these guys with their training. It's helped me to be able to kind of better understand where a muscle has better mechanical advantage, if a muscle responds better to being trained at longer or shorter lengths, or what the resistance profile of a different muscle is or a different movement, just so you can kind of use that to help you decide what's going to be the best way for me to get the most out of this guy. So I think that's kind of those principles are what I use the most. But like you said, it's a lot different. So I feel like I just have to make sure that I don't get too excited about the bodybuilding training when I'm training guys in here because they're not bodybuilders. But having said that, I feel like I do train and I do treat a lot of that community because when a bodybuilder or somebody that competes in strongman or powerlifting or whatever finds a therapist that also trains like that, they're like, oh man, they're all about it. Like I had a guy in Cincinnati. He was a strongman competitor. He weighed over 400 pounds, tore his quad, and then tore it again. And the second time he tore it, his surgeon told him, "You're never going to be able to squat again. You probably shouldn't ever squat again if you want to be able to live a normal life." That was like a crushing blow to this guy because that was all he did. He actually just texted me recently. He's about 10 months out, 10, 11 months out of that. And he just squatted 750 pounds this week with no pain. And he said it felt better than he did before he was injured. So I think, being able to work with those guys, I think is really unique too, because I think working with fitness competitors and bodybuilders is unique because the way that they train obviously is different and what they need to be able to do is different. And, this guy being able to squat, having to squat 700 pounds, obviously it's unique in terms of kind of the rehab that needs to go into that because you can't treat that guy like, just, hey, I want to go back to the gym and just work out. So actually, there have been quite a few fitness competitors and bodybuilders that have reached out to me that I've treated, here and there. Obviously, being in the baseball facility, they're a little bit fewer and far between right now, but I guess that's kind of how I kind of mesh the two. But I think it's also nice too because having another passion besides just baseball and treating baseball, I think has allowed me to continue to stay excited about both because it's not like I'm here doing baseball and then when I leave here I go throw or I go hit or I go train baseball. I do something else. So I think it's allowed me to kind of stay fully invested in both because again, we talked about burnout before. I'm not getting burnt out with either one and I still really enjoy being able to kind of wear both hats and treat both kind of population.
There's a few things you addressed in that answer that I feel like we could go any which one of these ways, and each one of them would probably take an hour to fully get through. So I don't know the best way for me to respond, but I'll address the topics that I'm very interested in nonetheless. One, hypertrophy-based athletes versus force expression-based athletes, being baseball players specifically in a rotational manner. The other you called upon, which I was very interested in, so maybe this is the route we'll end up going, workload management, knowing that bodybuilding is very much a train to fatigue type sport or type endeavor. I mean, granted, I don't know much about it. People can see me. I'm 190 pounds on my good days, so I don't even know if I can begin to talk about the fatigue that bodybuilders experience. But from what I've witnessed in gym, that's what it seems to be, just train to fatigue. So workload management becomes extremely important. Those are probably the main two. So we'll stick there. I'll let you go choose your own adventure. Which route do you want to go here, Jason? Do you want to talk about the workload management, how that has kind of really influenced the way you're treating athletes now, or do you want to go the force expression route? And if we have time, we'll get into both.
I think there's something interesting that we could bring up with the workload management is that, and kind of you touched on this just with when you were bringing up the topics. Bodybuilding is interesting because you're not training to perform in anything. You don't really need all that muscle and what you're training to do anything. You're training to look good on a stage and it's all about the aesthetics and the looks. So I think that just differs a lot because with a baseball player, it doesn't matter how you look, it matters how you perform. So it's very different in terms of what you need to be able to actually do. Like with a bodybuilder, for example, it really doesn't matter how strong they are or mobility to an extent, but it doesn't really matter how well their muscles can perform as long as they can go out on a stage and pose and look good. That's what essentially their success is based off of, is how they look. Whereas with the baseball player, the success is based off of how they perform. So I think with bodybuilding, as far as training goes, if you find a training method that works for a guy in terms of he's growing on it and he's responding well and he looks the way that you want them to look or that he wants to look or that he's happy with, or he's bringing up lagging body parts that maybe a judge told him that he needed to work on or whatever. It's all about the look, which is, I just think, unique because all other sports need to be able to perform. And I mean, I guess you could say to bodybuilding, your performing is being out on the stage and posing, but it's a lot more about just kind of the look of the muscle. Whereas with baseball, you've seen baseball players look all kinds of different ways. I've seen baseball players look like they've never worked out a day in their life. And then I've seen baseball players that look like they're a bodybuilder. That's different too, in the sense that when you're training just to look good, it doesn't necessarily matter your rate of force development as much. It doesn't necessarily matter how you can express force on a force plate or a flex pro or something like that, because that's not really what you're being tested on. Whereas in baseball, if you're not able to do that, and if you're not able to express that force efficiently, you're not going to perform well and you're not going to succeed in your sport. So I think that's where the training is just a little bit different. Like, you don't see a lot of bodybuilders doing a lot of high velocity explosive stuff unless maybe they just enjoy it and they want to. So I think that's where it's just the training style is a little bit different. Hypertrophy training is kind of unique in its own way, just in that that's your main goal, is how you look. And I think a lot more bodybuilders like to use, as with baseball, it's a little different. If you look at our gym out here, there's a lot of power racks, dumbbells, kettlebells, bands, things like that. There are not very many machines. If you go to a bodybuilding gym, it's almost the opposite. A lot of machines, and there's power racks and dumbbells and things like that, but the majority of the gym is machines, because again, when you're able to train on a machine, the inherent stability that the machine allows you to kind of isolate a particular muscle a little bit better so that you can focus on developing that individual muscle group or muscle. Whereas in baseball, again, it doesn't necessarily matter as much isolating a muscle or making sure that your muscle is fully developed. It matters how you're performing. And a lot of time with performance, it's a group of muscles and it's more of a compound movement. So it's just kind of interesting too when you see a bodybuilding gym versus football weight room or a baseball gym. They just look totally different, just because the goal of what you're going to get out of that training is totally different.
Sticking on the theme of workload here, specifically in training or in physical therapy, what have you, knowing that baseball is more of a force production-esque sport or force expression, there's only so often you can expose an athlete to those high loads or high expression bouts versus, as you were starting to mention, it does not matter if you are tired when you are bodybuilding, because we can kind of just keep going. Or as you said, it's not like the competition requires force expression. It's just, do you look good? Knowing that you have so much experience on the feel side of things, working in this bro science area or having a passion in the bro science area, if someone isn't at Driveline and they don't have the amazing data driven tools that you have, you're probably super well positioned for this. How can they begin to judge when to cut off a rep or when to cut off an exercise so the athlete can get back to baseline the next day or be ready to train again to keep inching forward towards their ultimate goal?
Are you talking in terms of more of like a baseball player training?
More for baseball.
So I think a lot of it just kind of depends on the individual, and if they're going to go in to train on a separate day, or if they're in physical therapy, how they feel. If they just feel run down and fatigued, I think is a big thing. I think that's kind of, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of hard to answer, just because I think it depends a lot on the athlete. In general, though, I think, like, when a guy comes in here, I'll kind of ask him, okay, well, how do you feel today compared to yesterday? Say they trained yesterday. If they come in the next day and they feel like, I felt like I was really sore after the workout, and today I feel a little bit better, but I still feel the effects of the workout yesterday. I'm still feeling sore. And this kind of go into the bodybuilding with this too. You hear a lot of people say that in order to grow muscle, you have to damage it first, and then it builds back stronger, which that's actually not what you want to do. So if you're causing muscle damage, that's not necessarily a good thing, because now not only does your body have to repair that damage first, then it can grow on top of that. If you're training a muscle hard enough to where it's damaged, and a lot of times that's where they might still be sore the next day if they actually train hard enough to cause muscle damage. So sometimes you ask them how they feel, and you go off how they feel in terms of determining what they would maybe do the next day as far as training goes. If they come in the next day and they're like, I feel great, I can't even tell I worked out yesterday, or I feel totally recovered, and then they go and perform and their performance doesn't look good, it's like, okay, well, maybe you feel good, but your performance isn't quite there. So I think just using a combination of those, kind of listening to the athlete, how do they feel, and then also observing them and how they're performing at the beginning of the workout or how their warm up looks or whatever it is, which I think is another important component of being able to be in this cash based setting, this one-on-one setting, because if you're in a big busy clinic and you have a couple people at a time, it's hard to have that conversation with the athlete because you've got three people going. So that guy might come in, okay, go out there and warm up on the bike, not even realizing that guy doesn't feel good from the last time he trained or the last time he did PT, or he threw yesterday and he doesn't feel recovered from it. You don't even know that because you really weren't able to have the conversation with him. Then you go send him out to do his warm up or his first couple exercises while you're working with somebody else and you really don't see him. So I think being able to have the conversation with them and kind of get an idea of how they feel, and then also see how they look too, because like I said, some guys might just not realize that they're fatigued, or they might just be so amped up to train that they just don't really realize it. But that's a good question. A lot of that just kind of depends so much on the athlete, but that's something that is one of the really nice things about being in this setting though, is because I feel like I'm able to tease that out of somebody and figure out their general preparedness to work out a little bit better than if I would have been in a clinic where I'm seeing 2 or 3 people. And I think that helps me to maybe modify that next training day so that they're still going to get something out of the day. It's not going to be a waste, but you're also just not overtraining and just, like you said, building more fatigue on top of fatigue they already still have. In that one-on-one setting, it's a little bit easier to do that. You can just kind of get a better idea of where an athlete is coming in and kind of use that to modify your day instead of just inherently ramping up again. Some of these athletes at the higher levels, I think they're a little bit more in tune with their body, but a high school guy might think, well, I'm supposed to feel this way, and we didn't have a conversation about it. I guess if this is okay, this is how I'm supposed to feel, not realizing that they're overtraining or not realizing that maybe they needed to have their day modified a little bit. Just being able to have those conversations is a huge part of it. And I think that's a lot easier to do when you have more time with that athlete one-on-one.
As we're starting to round things out here, what are some things you're excited about going down the line? You obviously have a full off season ahead of you. And for you, that doesn't just mean unlocking a new PR for a guy or helping him throw a new slider. That means potentially helping a guy break in big league camp who got hurt and might have lost their spot, something like that. So knowing that you have this off season to kind of help athletes remodel themselves or revitalize a career or heal something that was hurting all season, what are you looking forward to? What's getting you going over these next few months?
Like you kind of mentioned, I think one thing that I'm really looking forward to is we have quite a few guys here that aren't currently with an organization. It'll be really cool to be able to work with a guy in an off season and see him get signed. And like you said, see him go into a spring training where maybe in October he wasn't sure if he was going to have a job next year. Because to these guys, I mean, this isn't just a game; it's their career too. It's how they make money. It's how they provide for their families, and it's their life. It's their livelihood. So I think being able to be a part of that and be involved in that guy's ability to get signed by an organization and have a job in the spring, I think that's going to be really cool because I haven't really gotten to be in that position before. So I think being able to kind of work with a guy, follow him along the whole off season and kind of be a part of that process. And also just you hear a lot of big league guys, they'll talk about like their guy that they have in the off season. Oh, I go see my guy back home, whatever. I think being able to be the player's guy, to be that guy, I think is cool because in the past, I just see how highly the players talk about like the person that helped them in the offseason, the person they worked with all offseason to be able to go and break camp on the big league team or be able to actually have an organization, be able to be healthy the whole next year and not be hurt. When you see the excitement and the enthusiasm that those players have for the people that help them like that, I think just being able to be a part of that's really cool. And to me, that's why I do this. I don't do this just for the money of it or for the clout or being able to work with professional athletes. I do it because ultimately, at the end of the day, the most gratifying thing for me is to be able to help these guys and to be able to see them succeed, to be able to see how happy they are when they throw 90 or when they PR on a mocap or when they get signed by an organization, and to just be able to see how excited they are for that and see how happy they are and know that you were a part of that and you were involved in that, getting them to that spot. That's the biggest thing, more than money or more than getting a shout out on Instagram or anything like that. I think it's just being able to know that like, hey, I was able to help this guy and get him to this point where at the beginning of the offseason, he maybe wasn't sure what the next year was going to look like for him.
Speaking of shout out on Instagram, this is now your turn to share your social media handles. So I know you said you don't care too much about the shout out. You actually want to help the athlete where they go. But this is the time where I need you to shout out yourself. So if anyone wants to get in touch, follow along with what you're doing, or just learn more about you, please share.
So the one I just made last week for the business, it's dr.jasonmodafari.dpt. That's kind of the business Instagram. It's mostly just going to be baseball. And my other one, my fitness one, is modafit513. I created two different ones. I was kind of thinking about it, and I was like, I already have kind of a following on that one. I've already made 100 posts, but I thought to myself, because I was actually at the gym talking to guys about it, and they're like, man, we don't care to see a bunch of baseball stuff on your Instagram. Like, if bodybuilding workouts, like, I don't want to see like all this baseball stuff that I don't understand. And I thought, yeah, I guess that's a good point. So I just decided to create one where it'll be kind of all baseball, and maybe I'll just put my bodybuilding handle on it in case somebody from that realm wants to see the fitness stuff too. But I think the bodybuilders would be less interested unless they have a son or a relative that plays baseball. Probably aren't going to want to see an account flooded with that as much. So I felt like having two separate ones in that circumstance might be helpful.
It's funny you bring that up because I bet there's a handful of baseball players that would love to see your bodybuilding content. But of course, the bodybuilding guys don't want any part of your baseball stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And you're right. There are the baseball guys that like to see the fitness stuff, but I feel like for the bodybuilding, they're not that they dislike it, but they're just not as interested in baseball content, which, I mean, I get it. That's fine. But I think it would, and I could see how it would be a little bit maybe confusing to post both on the same. And people are going to look at it and be like, all right, I don't understand this page. There's a picture of him working out in a bodybuilding gym with these huge guys. And then the very next post, he's talking about weighted balls and return to throw. These guys probably can't even throw a baseball. They're so big. So what is the deal with this page?
Which means we might need, I know you said you're not training anything baseball related, but we might need a road to 75 video or something like that from you.
I'd be interested. I don't even know how hard I could throw a baseball, so maybe I'll try and I'll let you know how hard it goes, and I'll see what it's at. I feel like I can hit one pretty hard. I don't know. I don't know how fast I could throw one. Maybe I'll
We
do.
also,
I'll let you know, and then we can maybe make a road to 75 or a road to
yep.
100 exit kilo or whatever.
We also might need you to be the first person to be able to do a back bridge in your bodybuilding gym because I doubt there's many people in there that can put their hands on the ground.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, some of those guys have trouble getting off the toilet, much less. I think I would definitely be the first one to be able to do something like that in there.
Maybe that's the unlock in the bodybuilding world. People haven't spent enough time on mobility. I might not know what I'm talking about, but that could be the thing.
Oh, I'm sure. I think there's quite a few that don't. Yeah. Although you see a couple guys that they're pretty flexible, but then there are some that it's the worst flexibility you've ever seen. So
Train at length, right? People talk about it all the time. So if you can train at length, you might be onto something there.
yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
I know we briefly hit on it earlier, but mechanical advantages, I don't know if you're training at the long muscle length. So if you're bent over, I mean it works for the forearm, it works for the hamstring, it works for the quad. Why wouldn't it work for the pecs? Why wouldn't it work for the delts?
I'll have to try to do one at the like on the turf area at the gym and see what people think.
Yeah.
Get one of the bodybuilders to see if he can do one.
Yeah, that's the content that I'm going to be coming for, and
Yeah.
hopefully you get a big boost for you just inciting different bodybuilder mobility challenges. Maybe that can be your little niche.
I can post. Yeah, I'll post some of those. I'll post on my baseball Instagram. I'll post my throw and how hard it is. See what it is.
That's right.
Road to 75. That's probably a pretty good benchmark.
Right, that seems reasonable at least to start. I don't know. I don't want to tell you to do road to 90 right away and you're throwing
Okay.
61 miles an hour. I mean, that might take a little bit of time.
And I think the hitting, like I said, I think that might be all right. I'll have to get in there and see how hard I could hit one. If I can hit it, that would be the first thing.
I guess I'm not too concerned with your ability to stop force. It's just how quickly can you create
I
it?
think start. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think being 5'4" and weighing 190 pounds is not a super good combo. for throwing the baseball hard. But
True muscle hamster.
yeah, that well, yeah, yeah.
Well, there we have it. Jason, thanks a ton. I know we covered a lot of different topics today that we don't normally cover on here, which hopefully it'll create some questions from the masses because obviously you can call upon some different experiences from most of us in this industry who are all washed up baseball players that found some way to stick in versus you saw something amazing from the outside and wanted to get involved. But Jason, it's been great to get to know you over these past few weeks. And I'm looking forward to growing the relationship and continuing to make the world of baseball better together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me on this. Like I said, this is the first podcast I've ever been on. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on here. And I think it's really cool to be kind of involved in this podcast and just now in this kind of world, this space, I guess, as far as baseball treatment and training goes. So yeah, so again, thanks again for having me. And this was great.
Definitely. Well, Jason, again, thank you. And to all the listeners out there, thanks for laying back with us.